Giddy up, as they say. Today is July 29th, Tuesday, 2025, and this is episode 316 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is the wonderful, spectacular, amazing Mr. Andrew Kellett.
Oh, me? I thought we had somebody else with that kind of intro. Hello, Mr. Bell. How are you?
I'm awesome. How are you doing?
Good. It's Tuesday, which means I survived Monday. So one day closer to the weekend.
Only 6 more days till the next Monday. Yep.
That's true. And this past weekend, we took out the defensive security yacht on one of our local lakes.
That was awesome. Always awesome. So thank you for another awesome boat day.
I do think a turtle bit one of my toes, but no damage. But
I got attacked by something, so yeah. And we got to listen to the song too, so
it's true.
It's not a boat day without song.
That's true. Everything. Another fun day in the world of information security. I'll just put it that way.
They are all fun. And the only easy day was yesterday.
That's true.
So just a reminder before we go any further that the thoughts and opinions we express are ours and not those of our employers. And a continued thank you to our Patreon sponsors. Thank you very much. We continue to look for new and exciting ways to reward you, but just a reminder to everybody that our Patreon sponsors get the show a week early. So today is the 29th. The wild masses will get to listen to this episode. I think, if my math is right, it'll be August 2nd, something like that.
If only they made some sort of chart that would tell these things.
I know. I don't have that chart in front of me. So anyway, it should be available to our Patreon sponsors tomorrow, which will be July 30th, or maybe later tonight if I get really adventurous.
Depends on how much edits we have to do, right? Depends on how bad the post edits are.
Exactly right.
So the good news is our Patreon subscribers get it a week early, so they can be outraged earlier than anyone else at whatever foolishness we have to say. So if you want early outrage, just any donation in our Patreon page will get you that.
Correct.
But just a thought.
So another change that we are going to make, we have been, up to now, we've been holding back 2 stories for Patreon exclusives. I think, because we feel like the world needs more Jerry and Andy. We're gonna make all 5 available each week, but again, it'll be lagging a week behind. And we're going to continue to look for some new and exciting things to reward our Patreon sponsors with. So one thing I've been looking at is some discount codes to the DefSec store. I'm not sure exactly how I do that yet, but that's something I am looking at. Which, by the way, I should remind everybody that we now have a brand new, shiny defensive security merch store. It's at store.defensivesecurity.org. My wife, by the way, full credit to her, went through last night and did all sorts of additions. So I think there's even a baby bib. But
which may work well for many executives.
It's true. And if you happen to be on the site, she is exceptionally proud of the coffee mug. So just hint. So there you have it. There you have it. I do want to say one of the things that's been requested by our Patreon sponsors is live streams, and I think we have the technology to do it. My concern is just the scheduling of it. So I am, Andy and I are going to talk a little bit about that and how that plays with the Patreon sponsors. So we'll get, we'll make some more announcements on that in the coming days and weeks.
I just need to make sure it doesn't conflict with your mom's live stream.
Fair enough. That was the other request, by the way, was more your mom jokes. So thank you for being there. One other bit of housekeeping is that we will be hosting a live episode, a first ever live episode in front of a security conference. I mean, normally these are recorded in front of a stadium full of fans, right? But this will be our first time at a security conference. This is coming up on August 20th. It's called Mission Security 2025. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes. If you happen to be in Atlanta, feel free to subscribe, or I should say sign up, and hope to see you there.
Yeah, I think it's free. I don't know.
I think it's a good question.
Yeah, I think it is. Either way, good folks running it who I've known for a long time, and we did put in our rider to make sure that they sort the green M&Ms from the rest. And I think we've got 4 or 5 security who will be ringing the stage to keep the groupies back.
Yeah. Yeah, it does usually get kind of wild there. So we'll be fun. It should be fun. So let's get into our stories for today. And what security podcast would be complete without a discussion about the SharePoint debacle?
Must be done.
So this one comes from the Register, and the title is "Blame a Leak for Microsoft SharePoint Attacks. Researcher Insists." So Microsoft has this program. Not a lot of people know this who aren't deeply familiar with how Microsoft works, but they have this program called MAP. It's MAPP, and it is a relationship they have with close business partners. Typically, it's vendors of other types of software, or for example, cloud providers and whatnot, where there is a business need for that business partner to have early access to patches and vulnerability information to do things like make sure there's compatibility, there's no compatibility issues, and so on. This has been in place for a very long time. And it has, by the way, been problematic in the past. There's been accusations of impropriety in the past where, there's been some concern that members of the MAP program have used their early access to bad advantage. And that appears to be one possible source for what happened here. So from a timeline perspective, Microsoft released patches for SharePoint on Patch Tuesday, which I think was July 8th. And on July 7th, active exploitation of the SharePoint vulnerability, which was fixed in the patches released on July 8th. July 7th, again, is when active exploitation of the SharePoint vulnerability was first observed. Members of MAP would have received information about the vulnerability, not like exploit code or anything like that, but a description of the vulnerability and the actual patches 2 weeks before. So sometime in late June, they would have received the information. And one of the hypotheses is that somebody who is a member of MAP leaked that information to some bad actors, and there's a couple of Chinese threat actors that are believed to be participating in the act of exploitation, and some ransomware gangs as well. In any event, there were roughly 400 organizations hacked via this vulnerability. Now, there's been some confusion, by the way, because Microsoft went and released another set of patches about, I think it was a week or two later, for the same set of issues. They did issue new CVEs, but there was some belief that the fix wasn't complete, and that was actually what the actors were taking advantage of, and that appears not to be the case. The subsequent patches were to close some some alternate code paths that could lead to similar kinds of exploitation, not necessarily related to the act of exploitation that had been happening. And so, a lot of the media that was covering this was calling the attacks 0-day. And if you read, I'll include a link to it as well, but one of the sources of this, it was a company called iSecurity. It's EYE.security is their website. They are one of the early observers of this vulnerability and had originally characterized this as a 0-day attack because it was believed that the fixes Microsoft published in early July as part of Patch Tuesday didn't actually fix the vulnerability. But that's since been kind of walked back in their blog post. And again, it's linked from the article, but also I'll include it in the show notes. But this was not the 400 that were hacked apparently was not the result of a 0-day. The patch was out there. However, there was apparently at least one day where it was under exploitation as a 0-day. So the whole thing is kind of murky. I'm not going to lie. But one of the sinking feelings I had, because look, I think the first time I played with SharePoint was in the late 90s, like long time ago. And it has been a trash fire like its entire life.
Well, eventually it will burn out. Or maybe it's like one of those eternal fires, like the coal mine that's on fire under
That's right.
a town in Pennsylvania.
That's right.
Centralia, Pennsylvania.
It will never burn out. So, I don't know what to say. There's nothing particularly spectacular about the vulnerabilities. There was, there were two chain vulnerabilities. One was kind of a brain dead bug where if you could basically trick SharePoint into thinking that you were previously logged in by setting your refer to the logout page, which would then cause SharePoint to think that you were actually logged in, which I don't know why that is. And if you did that, there was another bug that allowed you to edit the page. And in order to, if you had that edit ability, you could actually upload arbitrary files and then obviously execute them. So that when those two things were chained together, it allowed unauthenticated code execution, which is about as bad as you can get. And that's what bit the 400 or so victims here. I think the challenge is that the exploitation happened before the patch was available, right? And even if you were not among the first victims, and you were targeted on July 9th or 10th, day or two later, even if you have a super aggressive patch schedule, I just don't know. I don't think it's commonplace for an organization to patch something like SharePoint, within hours of the patch coming out. And I would love to say like this is a total one-off. It's it's such a rare event that we just have to kind of live with it. But I don't think that's the case.
Yeah,
not with SharePoint.
No. Well, you covered a lot of really good territory there, and I had a couple thoughts that I'll step back and kind of step forward through your commentary. The first one I was thinking about is, if this did get leaked through the MAP program, it might not have been an intentional leak. It's very possible that there could have been a bad actor who had some sort of presence in an environment that gets the early access, and it leaked that way, which would have been, we have no idea how it leaked. But I was just thinking, there is a bit kind of this undercurrent of somebody in the MAP program may be untrustworthy, but maybe not. Maybe they've got a bad actor who's sitting with presence in their environment and looking for this kind of stuff, which would be helpful to a bad actor, not a bad target to go after. So there's that consideration. The other thing is, I think this only applied to on-prem hosted SharePoint, not the cloud hosted SharePoint, which brings up yet again, why is it open to the internet? Not that it couldn't be hacked internally behind a VPN or behind a firewall, but it certainly makes it a lot tougher for the average bad actor coming out of China if it's not exposed to the internet. And the third item that I think about is those things that are exposed to the internet likely are much more likely to be hit by some sort of 0-day or 1 day, 2 day kind of post-patch exploit. And it's easier said than done, but those deserve a little bit extra attention with the concept of, hey, this might get popped. What would I do? How would I know? And that's highly variable depending on the environment. I think in one of the articles I was reading on this, one of the vendors was saying a CrowdStrike sensor sitting on one of the compromised hosts had some interesting findings that allowed them to decode it. But again, you would need a clever SOC. It's not like there's a built-in alert for this in a CrowdStrike sort of situation or another EDR situation. But I do think about that. How do I go back to the concept if it's internet facing and it's open to the internet, consider it a little bit more radioactive and try to find ways to know if it's been popped and contain that damage quickly, which, again, so much easier said than done. But that's how I think about defending against this sort of situation.
It's good advice. I think to a large extent, it feels like segmentation is a lost art, which help. And by the way, I do think that these days there are. I'm not going to defend it. I don't say this to defend the practice, but I don't think it was accidental that these SharePoint instances were exposed to the internet. I think they were using it like as intentionally as a public facing web server. And it was, was designed to host content available to the public. So whether that is a sensible thing or not, I guess is something to argue over. But one of the interesting points that you mentioned, and I think is worth talking a little bit about, because we see this over and over and over again, and that is that the cloud version was not vulnerable or not impacted. Right? We see that now. Obviously, Microsoft had their big Office 365 thing happen a year or 2 years ago, I guess. And that was, obviously pretty horrible. Maybe it was 3 years ago. God, I'm getting old. But that notwithstanding, most of the time when these sorts of things happen, we learn that the hosted version was not susceptible to whatever the problem was. And there's probably lots of different reasons for that. One of them is it might not be the actual same code base, or it could be the same code base, but, because they have access to that patch, they applied it, weeks or months prior. That was certainly something I saw, right, as a cloud, CISA for a cloud provider. So, I don't know what that says for the industry. It does, I suppose, put a little bit of a unfair balance on the side of SaaS, I suppose, I guess. But on the other hand, like, SaaS is such a black box, and we all bemoan and gripe and hand wring over the lack of transparency that these providers offer about what's going on behind the scenes. So
it very well could have been vulnerable, but patched so rapidly that they didn't need to disclose it. There's a whole lot of what ifs there, to your point. But there is an upside that I see, which is that I don't typically have to worry about patching my SaaS vendors. They typically do it rapidly and do it in an automated fashion. That's a bit of an advantage at times. But to your point, lots of lack of transparency issues too.
Yep. So there was I would say the main purpose of this particular article is to highlight the potential linkage of the MAP program to this vulnerability being exploited in the wild. And there is a brief mention of a researcher who was able to use one of the AI engines to create, I think it was Google's Gemini, to reproduce an exploit. Now, it's what's not at all clear to me is, like, was that done with after the fact, knowledge of how the exploit worked, or like was that researcher able to do that, just based on, well, I don't know, I guess my concern with following that thread is that I'm not sure a security researcher who didn't have this map access wouldn't have known to try to get Gemini to write an exploit in the first place. Otherwise, it's like just an incredible timing coincidence that that they came up with, that they asked Gemini to create the same exploit that ended up being used by these bad actors. So I don't know. I'm thinking that this is probably something that was done after the fact, and I'm always a little concerned about when it comes to AI and these experiments that people run, like how much background information are they providing that might actually end up skewing the the result, even if it's unknowing, right? Because it happened, and those models now, a lot of them have the ability to search the internet, right? And so, if you ask the model, hey, look, I'm oversimplifying to a fault, right? But I want you to build an exploit for this new SharePoint vulnerability. It may have some ability to go off and get some background on what's going on.
Yeah, I think there was even some talk of somebody who was able to use LLMs to use the patch to figure out an exploit. And I think that's just the beginning of this era of vibe hacking, as it were, vibe exploiting.
Yeah, I do think, since we have vibe coding, I do think we have to have vibe hacking.
Whether we like it or not.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And then we're just going to hack the vibe.
Our next story comes from Mashable, and we're going to stay on the theme of AI. See, that was a hell of a transition right there.
That was artful. Almost like you've done maybe 4 shows.
Almost. Like we still have about 670 or so to go before we get good at this. So
that seems reasonable.
Anyway, the title here is Google Gemini deletes users' code. I have failed you completely and catastrophically. it's a simple and dumb little example, but I think it highlights something that I wanted to spend some time talking about. We just made some jokes about vibe coding and vibe hacking, and the reality is this is becoming a big thing. Like, vibe coding is becoming very pervasive, and we don't have a story in the pot to talk about today, but there's a big hoopla about this thing called the T app that was hacked, and there's allegations that it was vibe coded, and I don't know if that's the case or not, but it almost doesn't matter so much, because we know that we know vibe coding is happening. We also know that people who are apt, likely, not always, to use this as this technique are doing so because they're not necessarily conversant in programming. Like, they're not necessarily software developers. Now that's not exclusively so. Like, we know that there are instances where LLMs are being used to be a force multiplier for existing experienced software developers. And I'm not talking about that, but there are a lot of people who are doing this vibe coding thing who really don't have, much of any background. And there is this assumption, and it's almost like anthropomorphizing AI. Like, it's attributing capabilities to AI that aren't there. So, for example, in this instance, the person here asked Gemini CLI, which is a new tool, which I think is kind of silly. It's a CLI version or CLI accessible format of the Google Gemini AI engine, and so you can do all the normal stuff you would think about from a CLI, right? And so this person asked Gemini to move a bunch of files to another directory, and it was supposed to create a new directory, and that directory creation failed. And then it went and subsequently moved each file individually into that non-existent directory, which had the net effect of deleting all but the last file. And that's what this story is all about. So it's kind of a yawner. It was not a big production type environment that was impacted, but I think it highlights the point that these tools are not intelligent in the way that I think a lot of people believe that they are. Not yet, at least. I'm not saying that, by the way, I'm not saying in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years that they won't get there. I'm saying that today, if you ask an AI LLM to write some code, it's not necessarily going to write the thing that you are hoping it would write. And if you aren't smart enough to know that it, to review what it created, you're probably going to get disappointed. And as an example, one of the concerns I've got with people who are creating these vibe coded applications, they don't know that they need to ask the AI, to protect, when it's created the code, to incorporate methods to prevent SQL injection attacks, and to store your passwords in some kind of one-way or hashed encryption format, and on and on and on, right? Like that. Those are things that you learn throughout your the process of becoming a software developer. And when you sit down and approach it from a business function or usability perspective, you don't know that you have to ask it to do those things. And because it isn't intelligent unto itself, it isn't going to do it for you, generally speaking. Now, again, I think there's going to be a market for it. Like, so there's probably already some AI out there that's, is going to cover for that deficit. But, broadly speaking, if you sit somebody down in front of Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT and ask it to write some code to create an app, it'll create the app, but it's going to be a crappy version that's probably super insecure. And the person writing it is ignorant of that insecurity.
Yep.
So
I like to say we've got artificial intelligence. We don't have artificial wisdom.
Good. It's a good way to characterize it.
It doesn't know. It doesn't know what it doesn't know. It doesn't know what, and the person asking us, it doesn't have the requisite knowledge yet to know if the way that it's being approached by the LLM is a good or bad way to achieve the goal. Now, you might say this is something that we've seen from the era of assembly programming through now, which is every time we abstract a layer away from programming, people can get sloppier and sloppier and less optimized and less optimized. And as long as it works, right? So it's, this may just be the way it goes. And I think you're right too. Like we anthropomorphize these things because they've been built to act like, to communicate in the way we communicate, but it doesn't have the same intent. Like it says, I failed you completely and catastrophically. This is an unacceptable, irreversible failure. That makes you think that the LM has remorse and guilt, right. And it doesn't. It's just saying what it is predicting it should say in the next word around the situation. And by the way, there's also a part of me that I'm not calling BS on this story. It very well could have happened. Like if you look into it, what I was really trying to do was make a directory, move things over to it, and whatever. If you do a makedir, which it says it failed, and then do a move is copy and then delete, right? So you should then copy, make sure it's there, and then delete. And the makedir is what failed silently. I mean, that's a.
It seems I maybe I'm a cynical bastard, right? But I feel like a lot of these failures of AI agents are contrived things for the purpose of a blog post.
Sure. Yeah. It will get clicks. These are, and look, hey, we're talking about it, but I mean, you kind of went down a different path, which I think was valuable, but where I was kind of going with this is I don't know how to confirm this story, right? Because AIs are such a black box, it's difficult to know what exactly failed and why and how to fix it. Mm-hmm. And that is one thing that in a general statement concerns me about heavy early use of LLMs is they're very, very difficult, at least for the way my brain works, to troubleshoot if something goes sideways.
Yeah, I think you're playing with fire at best. If you are asking an LLM to construct a set of shell commands that that get executed without human review, I just, if you look under the covers, you said it, it's a prediction engine. No, it's a highly tuned, very sophisticated, prediction engine, but it is a prediction engine. And, so it's going to base its, the things it puts together on what it's seen in the past. And that's not necessarily always going to be, valid. So it's not, it's not producing something that it objectively knows is going to work. It's producing something that it thinks is accurate based on how it was trained.
But it has an illusion of competence and confidence.
Yes.
So
yes,
it will very confidently fail.
Yes.
Right. That's an interesting problem I think we still are wrestling with. Now, to be fair, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not an anti-AI person. Like this genie's not going back in the bottle. And it will continue to iterate and continue to get better. And we will find these edge cases and they will get fixed. But it is an interesting challenge that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, I mean we're in a transition period right now, and that transition is going to be ugly and messy, and we don't know what it's going to look like when we get out the other at the other end. You mentioned something that reminded me of an interview we did on our other podcast, which we haven't done one in a very long time, and I forget his name right now.
Whose fault is that?
Probably mine. But he was describing AI, and he was using the metaphor of the GPS app on your phone, and how a lot of us, when we first started using it, it would send us a certain way, and it was different than what we're used to, and we would go our own, we would go the way that we're used to going, and inevitably we'd end up in behind an accident, or something would cause us undue delay, and eventually we learned to just trust the damn map. Right. And so I think there is this, I don't know how much it translates over to AI, but I think, we've been kind of primed to trust a lot of this technology. So
that'll teach you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to that same point, in the early days of GPS, people got routed across bridges that were out and down dirt roads, and eventually all those edge cases got fixed. Right.
Good point.
And now it's reliable. So, but that also was a very deterministic system with very tunable parameters and known outcomes that are easy to diagnose. The difference that, and again, I don't really truly understand this, but what I do understand is the prediction engine can do lots of different things in unexpected and unreliable ways that makes it more difficult to put hard and fast rules around some of these things.
Yeah, which I think is, it goes back to the net point. It's not actually intelligent in the same way that a human is intelligent, right? It's not doing things based on an objective certainty on how to do the thing. It's doing it based on, how it was trained, which is, not necessarily actually a valid use case. And so it can come up with garbage. A lot of times it comes up with, decent stuff. If you ask it to write a page, if you ask it to write an article with the same input, it'll probably not give you the same thing twice. So it's not like it's not like a deterministic thing. Like, it's not like a pseudo random number generator where if you give it the same seed, it always comes up with the same output. It's not the way it works. These are trained off of enormous data sets, and there's some amount of randomness in how it responds. And so, again, I think this is a temporary problem, and there may already be, reasonable solutions to some of this stuff that's just not permeated out into common use yet. But I'm worried. I don't know how to say it any other way. I'm worried about what the near-term future it has in store for us based on all of these vibe coded apps, and at the same time that, like, we seem to be cutting funding for security programs and whatnot. So I think we're going to have some fun times ahead.
Hot stoves everywhere. Let's see who touches them first.
Yes, indeed. All right, the next story comes from Ars Technica, and the title here is Supply Chain Attacks on Open Source Software Getting Out of Hand. This feels like it's just becoming a permanent fixture in our podcast. So yet, several more instances of hijacked open source repositories, of course, NPM and Python, One of them was this. It was Toptail was the name of the company that had their repo hijacked. They maintain this fairly widely used class of libraries that are used for constructing websites, and they've not actually disclosed how they were hacked. Like they haven't said how their repository was hacked. There's some hypotheses, like we know, for example, and it's described later in the article, we know that there were several other high profile repositories hacked through the same phishing tactic that has been used, I think, like three or 4 weeks in a row now. We've talked about stories where the same tactics were used, where they're using this lookalike npm JS, and it's just like a misspelling of the domain name to phish credentials from legitimate developers, and they get their access token, and then they hijack the repository. In this Toptail instance, though, it looks like it didn't start with the npm repository. It started with a GitHub repository. So there's a little bit of confusion about how it happened. I thought there was this was investigated and reported on by a company called Socket, and Socket does, they're starting to make kind of a business around trying to protect against these hacked repositories. And so, we've been shaking our fist at the sky saying, why won't somebody do something? And, they seems like they're off.
Where's the Blinky box?
Right. Socket seems to be trying to construct the Blinky box. They did give a couple of in addition to buying their stuff, which I don't really know how their products work, but their recommendations seem solid, but I think it's kind of one-sided. So I'll just read them real quick and then we can talk about them. So organizations should enable two-factor authentication, implement branch protection rules, and monitor repository visibility changes for unusual publishing activity. Developers must review package.json lifecycle scripts before installing dependencies. And the reason they say that is that in the case of that Toptail, the Toptail hack, the bad actors included a pre and a post action, and the pre-action was that it made a call to an external website, basically using the GitHub access token as as an argument, so they could steal the token, and then the post action was to delete the hard drive. so they're saying, well, you should look at those JSON files and make sure that it's not trying to steal your credentials and wipe your hard drives, which I think makes good sense. You need to use automated security scanning in your CI/CD pipelines, and I'm guessing that's where their socket stuff helps. And regularly rotate authentication tokens. Security team should monitor npm registry activities for unusual publication package patterns, implement network egress filtering to detect credential exfiltration attempts, and create incident response procedures specifically for supply chain compromises. That second sentence, the second part, I think is from the consumer side. The first part, I think, is from the open source maintainer perspective. Like, you need to protect your secrets. You need to implement multi-factor authentication on your access to your repositories, that sort of thing. But it's kind of unsatisfying as a consumer of open source, hoping that the people who are maintaining the repositories you're using are doing what is what's reasonable. And even the recommendations that they provide, while they're good, I don't think they're very reactionary, right? They're not protections necessarily. It's like making sure that, if you do run something that is bad, that it can't make a call out to exfiltrate your key. And and if it does try to delete your hard drive, like, you should have a DR plan, you should have a recovery plan. And I think that just speaks to like where we're at in the maturity cycle of this problem. But based on how frequently this is coming up, I feel like we're driving fast towards a brick wall here. And obviously some organizations are getting hurt already, but we're just accelerating. Like, this is not,
well, the bad guys
are not getting better.
Yeah, the bad guys have clearly found this is a nice target to go after, and that it's relatively undefended. It's not well understood. It's a good target of opportunity. And as we've said multiple times on the show, the bad guys learn from each other. If it works for one, others are going to repeat it, and they're going to iterate on the idea, and that's what we're seeing here. And but of course, all of InfoSec has been an arms race, and so now the bad guys have gone into a new area. We're seeing people showing up with their blinky boxes to try to help you solve that problem. But this is such a down in the weeds, behind the scenes problem that's built around automation, that's built around CI/CD pipelines that are supposed to be efficient and fast and easy. It's going to probably take some culture change as well to get developers to even think about this, or get security folks close enough to this problem and to this infrastructure to start to care and see how to solve some of these problems. I feel like this is fairly abstracted away from most security teams in general, at most software shops.
Oh, I think it absolutely is. And at the same time, we've talked in the past how ransomware was a huge inflection point for security. There's a before ransomware era and a after ransomware era, and the security world doesn't look, it changed pretty radically. Before, you could take risks, and if you were not, if you're not a high profile target, you probably were, you get away with a lot of bad behavior. In the after times, it's the ransomware actors don't care. Like, they'll go after everybody, hoping that everybody has data, some amount of data that is valuable, and they'll try to monetize it to whatever extent they can. And that has driven massive changes in how our security programs work collectively. And rightly so. I mean, you could argue, well, that's how it should have worked before. It was an inevitable outcome of things.
Well, security is always a cost, and you're not going to pay the cost until there's a reason, a compelling reason. Businesses are always trying to minimize costs. Security is just one more cost that they're trying to minimize. They don't want to spend any dollars or time or effort or red tape or bureaucracy on anything they don't have to. So, same thing.
But I can see, obviously this is pure speculation on my part, but I can see a potential for this, these supply chain attacks driving a similar, maybe not as significant, but another inflection point in how IT and security works. I don't know exactly all what that means yet, but I don't think we're anywhere close to seeing the bottom of this. Like, I think this is still a very kind of nascent technique. And, like a lot of the adversaries using this are doing it to destroy data, and kind of there's been a lot of like hacktivism and changing websites to play the Ukrainian national anthem, and that sort of thing. But this is going to become co-opted by much more serious threat actors like ransomware and nation states, and maybe it already has, and we just we don't see it because they have different motivations. But I really feel like we're going to see this become a much more acute problem in the coming years. So
I don't disagree. The other thing I want to mention is Google's also just launched something called OSS Rebuild. I don't know a ton about it. I'm certainly not advocating for it. Google's not a sponsor. I have no ties to Google, but it's quoting from their blog post, it's a new project to strengthen trust in open source package ecosystems by reproducing upstream artifacts to fight supply chain attacks. So it gives security teams powerful data to avoid compromise without burden on the upstream maintainers. So I haven't looked deeply into it, but it's interesting, and it could be an option. It also looks to be free and open source, and kind of something Google's doing as out of the goodness of their heart. Sure, they are, but to try to help. But it's another area where as we wring our hands and won't somebody just do something, maybe worth taking a look at. I have not run this past any coders or AppSec guys. So I don't know how realistic this is, but it's another thing to put on your radar to check into.
Yeah, I did read it a little bit, and my cursory understanding is that it will help certain avenues of certain types of attacks. So for example, where a bad actor gets access to your npm repository and they just swap out, like they increment the version number and they post a new package, that should, as I understand it, that approach should help with that. But in the instance where they get access to your GitHub repository where your actual code is stored, and they're able to tweak your code and then kick off your normal build chain, I don't think it will necessarily help in that instance, or at least help as much. But maybe I have some blind spot in my understanding of it. But I mean, look, I'm not trying to poop on it. It's certainly a step in the right direction, and I'm glad to see smart people are thinking about it.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right. So our next story comes from the Register here. This one is kind of wild. And it's kind of wild because like I can appreciate it, having worked for an IT outsourcing company. So the title here is $380 million lawsuit claims intruder got Clorox's password from Cognizant simply by asking. It's not hacking if you don't have to ask. It's not hacking if you just ask, right? That's, I guess, where we're at. So a lot of the details about what happened here are coming out in the lawsuit filing. So we've learned quite a lot. That Clorox is going after Cognizant, who is their IT outsourcing company, for $380 million, and that pays for lost sales and production runs, and I'm guessing cleaning their network, cleaning all their systems. Yep. Sorry, that was bad. Anyhow,
please send your hate mail to jerry@defensivesecurity.org.
Yes. So here's the long and the short of it is Clorox alleges in this suit that its internal, this is a quote, that its internal service desk manager requested an updated credential support procedure in February 2023, several months before the August 2023 cyber attack, which is this attack happened like 2 years ago. And after some pestering, Clorox claims that Cognizant's service desk lead responded and confirmed that the credential support procedure action item had been completed with what they're, I think, saying is like a hand wavy, educated the team as in the past tense. But then they go on to say, well, that was apparently a blatant lie, because there's actually a recording, like a recorded call of the threat actor calling into the Cognizant help desk and telling the help desk agent, I don't have a password. I can't connect, so I can't follow the normal procedure. And so the Cognizant agent says, well, okay, let me provide you the password. And then,
which, I mean, I got to say, good customer service.
Yeah. And so literally gives them the password, like, reads off the password, and then it's game on. The threat, like the person who this threat actor was, portraying, was apparently a non-privileged, just general employee, but they then used that to target an IT security employee at Clorox. And there's not a lot of detail in how that part happened, because I'm guessing that's kind of like, the internal dirty laundry of Clorox. But and it doesn't have necessarily anything to do with what Cognizant did. But I worked for one of the largest outsourcing companies, for a long time. It's no longer part of IBM. It's its own company now. And it's not Cognizant, by the way. So, they were awesome. They did awesome. But I can see how this would happen, right? Because, they tend to be huge organizations. They tend to be, these contracts tend to be like underpriced, overscoped. That they're almost always, we used to call it manage your mess for less, like, because companies who have like really well run, really well managed IT don't outsource their IT. Like, the people who have kind of broke ass IT, they're the ones that historically outsource. And almost
I've seen a lot of big companies outsource for cost savings. And
yeah, but I stand by my statement that it's one of the aspects of, in addition to one of the aspects of causing it to cost so much, is that it's not well, their internal IT is not well run. And so they're hoping that by outsourcing to, a company whose, core competency is IT operations, that they can drive efficiencies and whatnot. And their salespeople certainly will help you along that path. But look, of
course,
I can absolutely see this happening, because you've got almost certainly, really low experience, low grade call center agents who have, probably pretty oppressive metrics and targets on like how many calls you have to handle, and the metrics that you have to meet on customer satisfaction, and like the employee, not necessarily
sure
just the company, but like you have to make sure that the people who call you have a certain level of happiness when they are going through their transaction. So I can absolutely see this, and look, their management tends to be a mess. I don't have any insight into Cognizant. It's just that I know how these deals tend to be structured, and it's usually not good from the perspective of the outsourcer. And so the outsourcers typically are dancing to try to turn a profit, because they quite often, the way I always looked at it was, if you're, if you are signing a deal for $100 million or $1 billion to outsource your IT, which is not, by the way, an uncommon amount of money, you as the outsourcer will agree to a lot of stuff to sign that contract, because that's an incredible amount of money, and you make this assumption that you'll find a way to make up, like, whatever, anyway.
You'll keep your profit margin and somehow add enough efficiency to do the job while keeping your profit margin. Yeah,
exactly. And that manifests itself as, service leaders like being overworked or not paying full attention, and which is apparently what happened, allegedly, as alleged by this lawsuit in this instance, where they Clorox had apparently implemented a new process for this sort of thing that Cognizant didn't follow, and despite having confirmed that they trained their agents on how to implement the process. So now, there was one other thing that I found absolutely amazing in here, and that is the Register reached out to Cognizant for a statement.
Yeah, their statement's brilliant. I had that in my notes.
Do you want to read it? Because
yeah. So from Cognizant, quote, "It is shocking that a corporation the size of Clorox had such an inept internal cybersecurity system to mitigate this attack. Clorox has tried to blame us for these failures, but the reality is that Clorox hired Cognizant for a narrow scope of help desk services, which Cognizant reasonably performed. Cognizant did not manage cybersecurity for Clorox." Ouch.
Yeah, and that was another issue I observed in these IT outsourcing engagements, and that is like this stovepiping. You have these really hard lines of demarcation of responsibility, and from the outsourcing company's perspective, you're like, look, I'm paid to do X, right? And I'm going to do X. I'm going to do it X as good as I can.
And I might be measured on how quickly I can do X.
Yes.
And how many of these I can get done. And if I can find some shortcuts, I'm going to find them. How people are measured is absolutely how they will react.
Yes.
And so you have to be very careful with the metrics like this. So just to give a little context, if I could jump back for just a moment, what was supposed to happen according to Clorox is that when somebody called in for a password reset, what Cognizant was supposed to do upon receiving, I'm quoting from the article, upon receiving a network password reset request from a Clorox employee, service agents are supposed to, quote, guide the employee towards using Clorox verification and self-reset password tool called MyID, or if MyID was not available, to verify the employee's identity by A, manager name and MyID username before resetting the employee password, along with B, required confirmation emails to be sent to the employee Clorox's email account and to the relevant manager after the reset, none of which occurred. So, and on that point, by the way, I think Clorox has a very strong leg to stand on. This was the policy and the process that you agreed to follow. You didn't follow it. Bad things happen. But if you look at that process, it's slower. It takes longer. There's more friction, which from a security perspective is a good thing. But depending on how these employees are measured, that's a bad thing for their metrics.
Yeah, it's unclear based on the what's written here. It's unclear, but I kind of wonder if there wasn't a hole in the bucket process wise, because it sounded like the attacker here said, well, like I can't follow this process because I can't get into the network.
Right. So it sort of short circuited the script,
Right.
and the agent went down a different path to be helpful.
That was how I read it. Now it's it's hard to know exactly what really happened.
Can I call it one other area that I thought was hilarious from the
Sure.
lawsuit? So Clorox is stating, this is from the article. Clorox, it being Clorox, took its IT support partner. Let me try that again and actually learn to speak. Clorox also took its IT support partner to task for its post-incident response, alleging that when Clorox urgently requested that Cognizant reinstall a critical cybersecurity tool that the cybercriminal had uninstalled, Cognizant took over an hour to complete a task that should have taken less than 15 minutes. You know what? I think an hour is pretty good. Having worked in IT and security most of my career, that's actually a pretty good response time for an outsourced shop. I'm not going to be upset about that.
I was a little surprised. I forgot to highlight that part in the article, but I was a little surprised at that too. So the other thing is, typically you have very, very structured processes around change management and whatnot. And I could absolutely envision some confusion on how that change needed to be executed. And it's not like, we're not talking like days. They're saying it happened 45 minutes longer. It took 45 minutes longer than they thought it should.
Not bad, actually.
That's not so bad. Now, look, if I were, based on what's written here, if I were a jury, I would probably find for Clorox, maybe not for the whole $380 million, but that it's kind of unforgivable for a help desk agent to just give an unauthenticated person a password on the phone. Like it's just unforgivable. Almost no matter what else happened, like that by itself, paired with the fact that they agreed that they had deployed training on the process that was supposed to be followed, and apparently followed no part of the process, including like follow-up emails. I think Cognizant's going to have a hard time with this one.
Yeah, agreed. But we will follow it and see what happens. And I guess, by the way, the takeaway is you should be testing your outsourced SOC for these sorts of things, or outsource support on a regular basis for how they handle these sorts of things.
Yes, absolutely. And make sure that you, again, in almost every instance I have seen, because I was on the other side of the wall, right? And in almost every instance, there was confusion, there was disagreement, there was disconnect, and that's what leads to these problems. Now, most of the time, it's about stupid stuff, like we asked for a 2 terabyte hard drive and you gave us a 1.8 terabyte hard drive, and it's pedestrian crap like that. But that kind of can run the gamut. And so I would say, like, if you are outsourcing important parts of your IT, in addition to testing, like you just said, I think you have to make sure that you are, you're properly maintaining, you're properly structuring the agreement, you're properly maintaining the agreement, and you're monitoring you're doing something on an ongoing basis to monitor the performance of your vendor, because they have a different incentive than you do, right?
Correct.
Your incentive is to protect yourself. Their incentive is to meet their metrics and hit their margin targets and all those sorts of things. So by the way, I'm not saying that you shouldn't outsource. Like I don't want to come across as saying like this, it's a bad thing. It's always a bad thing. I'm not saying that at all. I think there can be value if it's done well, because whatever you think about IT outsourcing, those companies tend to have well-worn processes. Like they do know it's where you tend to deviate and want to go your own way that I found you have problems. So there you have it.
I think we have talked that one into the ground.
Yep. And then the last story for today comes from Bleeping Computer. And the title here is Allianz Life confirms data breach impacts a majority of its 1.4 million customers. So this is a quote on July 16th, which is actually not too long ago. A malicious threat actor gained access to a third-party cloud-based CRM system used by Allianz Life Insurance Company of North America. An Allianz Life spokesperson told Bleeping Computer. So now they have not disclosed, by the way, which CRM was impacted. They did go on to say they took immediate action to contain and mitigate the issue, and they notified the FBI. And based on their own investigation, they've found no evidence that Allianz Life's network or other company systems were accessed, including their policy administration system. And that one stuck.
And they take security very seriously.
Yes, they take the privacy of your data very, very seriously. When I read that one as a CISO, I had, I guess I'm not anymore, right? But as a former CISO, I had a lot of heartburn with the way they worded that, because there is like this tacit assertion that the systems that they've outsourced are not theirs. Like that, that's somebody else. Like
not our fault. Not our.
I don't know. Salesforce or Microsoft. I can't control them. They're the ones that screwed up. It's one of the first things you have to understand in the world of corporate, and organizational security is like, it's your responsibility. Like, no matter how you outsource, you retain responsibility. And if it just feels like they're trying to shirk that responsibility. Maybe I'm misreading it. Maybe it didn't come across well. But what I thought was worth talking about in this article, because there's not a lot of detail, Allianz is not being upfront, but there is an assertion, a rumor, if you will, that the hacker or the threat actor behind this attack was called the Shiny Hunters Extortion Group. And that group is responsible for such spectacular feats as Power School and Snowflake and a bunch of others. And they point out that there's been quite a few of them arrested over the interceding years, but they're still pretty active. What I thought made this worth talking about is that if it is that threat actor is apparently known for targeting companies who are using Salesforce CRM, and they appear to have a pretty well functioning attack tactic where they will trick the victim in, they'll portray an IT person from the victim or Salesforce. It's not entirely clear to me. But anyway, they'll trick the victim into providing access to this tool called the Salesforce data loader, which allows the uploading and extraction and some other functions on data stored in your Salesforce tenant instance. And they're apparently having some pretty good luck with this. And I hadn't heard of this this particular attack previously, and so I thought it was worth talking about that. There are threat actors out there that are intentionally going after victims that are using Salesforce and having luck with social engineering somebody at the victim to, and to create or grant access to the threat actor's Salesforce data loader, and that allows the threat actor then to basically download all of that customer's data out of Salesforce, and and then off they go. Now, we don't know, by the way, we don't know if that's what happened in this instance, but it is.
But you know what's funny? What's funny is they said that they used Allianz Life uses a third-party cloud-based CRM. Salesforce happens to be a third-party cloud-based CRM.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I see dots. I connect them, but we don't know.
Yeah, and if it were this, right, there was no hacking per se involved. Like they didn't hack an exploit. They didn't steal a credential, right? They hacked someone.
The human mind, Jerry. The human mind was hacked. That's even harder.
Or easier, as the case might be.
As the case might be. But yes. But it's not their fault. It's not their fault. Not their fault, man.
You can kind of get there if you squint really hard. Because there wasn't, they didn't install malware, right? They didn't, it's not something that CrowdStrike would have caught, right? They granted access.
They gave permission, to a third-party app
connection, which allowed somebody to download their data. So yeah, I mean, of course, there's no, they don't have persistence. Probably like Salesforce, assuming that's what happened, right? Salesforce didn't get hacked, right? Salesforce is just doing its normal thing. Somebody just granted access.
They granted an OAuth token to a third-party tool that you authorized.
Right. Exactly.
Which is tough too, because as like a defender, I'm thinking about, hey, was this an app that I don't want my people to install, so I don't let them install it? Well, that's not the situation. This is another SaaS console link they asked somebody to go out and log in and hit accept to, that gave them permission. So this is it's straight up social engineering.
And again, go ahead.
If our theory is accurate, if the speculation is accurate, to be clear.
Right. Well, we don't know that that's what happened to Allianz, but we know that this is happening to other organizations. And so therefore, Salesforce is used far and wide. It's used by a lot of people. And I think you have to ask yourself, do your employees who have administrative access to your Salesforce instance, would they recognize a social engineering attempt from someone claiming to be from your IT department, asking them to enable access to this component? Of course they would. Magic question.
That's what they'll tell you in the survey. Of course I can. You better test it.
I'll just put it in the chat GPT. Is this social engineering?
I've utterly failed you.
Anyway, forearmed is forewarned is forearmed. So I've said it. I said it a couple of shows ago, and I got some feedback about my opinions on security awareness training, and I will reiterate my belief that security awareness training is most effective when we're communicating things that are new and novel. And I think this is one of those things that are new and novel. And so, if I were constructing a security awareness training program, this is something I would include.
Who asked you?
I don't know. Nobody.
Just trying to come up with something clever. That's my job.
All right, that is the show for today. I hope this was useful to you. Thank you for riding along with us. Look forward to talking to you next week. You can find links to all the stories we talked about today, as well as our merchandise store and our Patreon page. If you'd like to get this episode a week early, we'll be on our website at defensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 316. So you can find me, by the way, on online. It's at Jerry at infosec.exchange. That is my Fediverse handle, not my email address. Although it will actually work as my email address too. But I digress. So how can people find you?
You can find me on your amazing Mastodon instance, infosec.exchange at lerg, L-E-R-G, and on X at lerg, L-E-R-G.
Awesome. And with that, we will talk again next week. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a good week. See you. Bye.
Bye.